Zia stepped into the crowded marketplace of the alien city, her small figure barely visible amidst the towering aliens around her. The place was bustling with activity, filled with creatures from every corner of the galaxy. Alien ships zoomed overhead, leaving trails of light as they entered and exited the atmosphere. The city was a massive sprawl of futuristic technology, with towering skyscrapers that reached the heavens, neon signs flashing in every language imaginable, and hovering vehicles zipping through the air. Despite all the noise and chaos, Zia moved with grace. Her long, silver hair flowed behind her like a shimmering river, and her glowing eyes scanned the area with precision. She wasn't just any ordinary alien. She was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, known for her telekinetic abilities. With a single thought, she could move objects, control minds, and even lift massive ships off the ground. But despite all her power, she was alone in a world that feared her. Zia didn't want to stand out, but it was impossible not to. As she walked through the market, whispers followed her every step. Merchants nervously eyed her, and aliens hurried to avoid crossing her path. No one dared to challenge her, not because they respected her, but because they were terrified of what she could do if angered. She had once destroyed an entire fleet of warships just to defend herself. It was said that she could crush entire armies with nothing but a flick of her finger. But Zia was tired. Tired of being feared. Tired of being alone. She wanted peace, but peace was a luxury for those who didn't have enemies lurking at every corner. As she moved deeper into the marketplace, she felt something. A presence. Something or someone was watching her. She paused, turning her head slowly, scanning the crowd. Her heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was a human. Zia's eyes narrowed. Humans were rare in these parts of the galaxy, and they were often seen as weak, unimportant. Yet here was one, standing in the shadows, observing her every move. She felt a strange sense of unease wash over her. Humans, unlike the aliens she had encountered before, didn't fear her. They didn't understand the power she possessed, and that ignorance was what made them dangerous. The human didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Zia's instincts told her to leave, to avoid this potential threat, but something held her back. She had never encountered a human like this before. Most humans she had met in the past had either run away or tried to take advantage of her powers. This one, he was different. Before she could make a decision, a noise interrupted her thoughts. The marketplace seemed to freeze for a moment. A group of rough-looking aliens stepped into the scene, their eyes locking onto Zia. They were known as mercenaries. Dangerous and ruthless, they were often hired to capture or kill those with powers like Zia's. One of them, a large, heavily armored alien, stepped forward with a menacing grin. "You've caused enough trouble, little girl," he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Time to come with us." Zia's heart pounded. She had been through this before. These mercenaries had come to capture her, to take her back to their employers, somewhere she didn't want to be. The air around her crackled with energy as her powers flared to life, ready to strike at the first sign of aggression. But just as she prepared to defend herself, something unexpected happened. The human from the shadows stepped forward. His eyes never left Zia's as he slowly moved into the center of the group of mercenaries. Zia felt a surge of confusion. Why wasn't he running? Wasn't he afraid? The mercenaries, equally puzzled, paused for a moment, unsure of what to do with this new, uninvited player in their little game. "Stay out of this, human," one of the mercenaries growled, drawing a weapon. The weapon hummed with deadly energy, and the mercenary aimed it at Zia, ready to strike. But the human didn't back down. Instead, he moved quickly, almost faster than Zia could process. In one fluid motion, he pulled a sleek, high-tech gun from his side and fired, the blast hitting the mercenary's weapon and causing it to explode in a flash of light. The mercenary dropped his weapon, shocked and disoriented. Before he could react, the human was already on him, disarming him with ease. Zia watched in stunned silence. The human wasn't just brave. He was skilled, far more skilled than anyone she had ever encountered. He fought like someone who had seen real battles, someone who had faced death and lived to tell the tale. The other mercenaries, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. Zia, sensing their uncertainty, knew it was her chance. With a thought, she raised her hand and sent a powerful shockwave through the air, knocking the remaining mercenaries off their feet. They scrambled to regain their balance, but it was too late. The human had already grabbed Zia's hand and was pulling her away from the chaos. "Come on," the human said in a low, calm voice. "We need to go." Zia was still in shock. The human had just saved her life. No one had ever done that before, and she didn't know how to feel about it. But something in his eyes told her that he wasn't afraid of her. For the first time in a long while, Zia didn't feel like the monster everyone thought she was. She felt human. She didn't resist as the human led her through the dark alleyways, away from the danger. As they moved deeper into the city, Zia couldn't help but wonder, who was this human? And what did he want with her? But one thing was clear, her life had just taken an unexpected turn. And she had no idea what was coming next. Zia's heart raced as the human pulled her through the dimly lit alleyways. Her mind was still reeling from what had just happened, how he had stepped in to protect her, without hesitation, even when every other creature in the market feared her. It wasn't just his bravery that confused her, it was the way he moved, like he had trained for moments like this. His calm and confident demeanor stood in stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded them just moments ago. "Why did you help me?" Zia finally asked, her voice soft but steady. She couldn't hold back the question any longer. The human had risked his life for her, an alien no one had ever dared to stand up for. She couldn't understand why. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled her into a narrow corner and quickly looked around, ensuring they weren't being followed. The alley was quiet now, with only the hum of distant hover cars filling the silence. His grip on her hand tightened as if sensing the danger wasn't completely gone. His eyes scanned the street with sharp focus before he turned back to Zia. "I didn't do it for you," he said, his voice low but firm. "I did it because no one should be treated like that. Not even you." Zia blinked, a mix of surprise and confusion filling her mind. She had heard humans were supposed to be weak, defenseless creatures, yet this one stood before her with strength in his eyes, strength she hadn't seen before in anyone, not even the most powerful of the galaxy's warriors. His words struck her in a way she wasn't prepared for. No one had ever stood up for her, not once. In the many years of her life, she had only known fear and control, her own powers had always kept others at bay, but this human, he didn't fear her. Zia was used to being feared. That was all she had ever known. She had been a weapon, a tool of war, something to be used and discarded. But this human, he had seen something in her that no one had ever seen. His eyes weren't filled with terror, but with understanding. His gesture, so simple yet so profound, made Zia feel like she mattered. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't just a thing to be controlled. She was someone. "Who are you?" Zia asked again, her voice soft but insistent. Her curiosity had grown too powerful to ignore. She needed to know more. The man hesitated for a moment, looking down at the ground as though debating whether to reveal his identity. Then, with a sigh, he looked back up at her, meeting her glowing eyes with determination. "My name is Daniel," he said simply. "And I'm here to stop those mercenaries from taking you." Zia raised an eyebrow. "Stop them? From taking me?" She laughed bitterly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You have no idea what you're up against, human. I'm more powerful than you could ever imagine. I don't need saving." Daniel smiled faintly. "That may be true. But even the strongest need someone to watch their back sometimes. Zia stared at him, still trying to understand. She had been alone for so long, keeping others at arm's length because of her immense power. She had never allowed anyone to get close, but this human, Daniel, was different. He wasn't intimidated by her strength. He wasn't afraid of what she could do. In fact, he seemed more concerned for her than for his own safety. Before Zia could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the alleyway. Daniel immediately went on alert, his eyes flicking to the entrance of the alley. Zia followed his gaze, her mind instantly on guard. The mercenaries. They hadn't given up. "Get ready," Daniel said, pulling out a sleek, high-tech weapon from his belt. It wasn't as advanced as the weapons she had seen in battle, but it looked powerful enough. Zia couldn't help but admire the way he moved. Despite his human frailty, his actions were quick and deliberate. The two of them crouched low, staying in the shadows, waiting for the mercenaries to come closer. Zia's mind raced. She could easily take them down, wipe them out in an instant, but Daniel. He had risked his life for her, and she couldn't let him get hurt. The mercenaries appeared at the entrance of the alley, their large frames filling the opening. Their eyes scanned the dark alley, and Zia's pulse quickened. They had seen the two of them slip away, and now they were searching for them with vengeance in their eyes. "Where did they go?" one of the mercenaries growled, his voice thick with frustration. Daniel motioned for Zia to stay quiet, and she obeyed without question. He was calm, collected, and clearly experienced. Zia wasn't used to this feeling, this sense of partnership. She had always been alone. But now, with Daniel by her side, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The mercenaries continued to search, and Zia could see the flashlights of their search devices sweeping the alley. She tensed, preparing to defend herself if necessary, but Daniel had other plans. Without warning, he stood up from his hiding spot, taking aim at the lead mercenary. The shot rang out, echoing off the walls of the alley. The mercenary fell to the ground, stunned but alive. The other mercenaries, caught off guard, turned toward him, surprised by the human's audacity. "Get out of here, or you'll regret it," Daniel said, his voice steady. It was the first time Zia had heard him speak with such authority, and something about it made the mercenaries hesitate. They weren't used to being confronted, especially not by a human. One of them growled in frustration, and the others looked to him for direction. But something was different now. Daniel wasn't afraid of them. He stood tall, a quiet strength radiating from him. "Fine," the leader spat, his eyes burning with anger. "This isn't over, human. You'll regret interfering." With that, the mercenaries retreated, their footsteps fading into the distance. Zia was left in stunned silence. It was over, for now. Daniel turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers. There was no fear in his gaze, only a quiet, unwavering confidence. He had just stood up to a group of dangerous mercenaries without flinching. Zia couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did it because it's the right thing to do," Daniel replied, his expression softening. "No one should be treated like that. Not even you." Zia was silent for a moment. For the first time in years, she felt like someone understood her. Zia's heart pounded as the distant sound of footsteps echoed in the alley. The mercenaries had retreated for now, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they returned, and this time, they'd come prepared. The brief silence that followed was filled with tension. She glanced at Daniel, who was still scanning the area, his eyes sharp and alert. She had seen many battles in her time, but this felt different. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. This human, Daniel, was here with her, and somehow, that made her feel safer than she'd ever felt. "We need to move," Daniel said, breaking the silence. "They'll be back, and they won't be as easy to shake off next time." Zia nodded without saying a word. She didn't need to be told twice. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to escape. The mercenaries were relentless, and the path ahead was filled with danger. Yet, despite the chaos surrounding them, something deep inside her told her that she had to trust Daniel. They moved quickly, ducking into a side street and blending into the shadows. Zia couldn't help but feel a strange connection to him as they hurried along. She had never relied on anyone before, never trusted anyone enough to let them in. But Daniel was different. He didn't seem intimidated by her power, and he wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. It was a feeling Zia couldn't quite describe, but it was one she wasn't ready to let go of. They ran through the narrow streets of the city, always staying a step ahead of the mercenaries. The urban landscape around them seemed to close in, the towering buildings casting long shadows over the alleyways. Zia's keen senses allowed her to detect every movement, every change in the air. But it wasn't enough. The mercenaries were relentless, and soon, they were back on their trail. The sound of their boots grew louder, and Zia could feel the tension in the air. She reached for her communicator, activating a cloaking device that would make them invisible to any detection systems the mercenaries might be using. She looked over at Daniel to make sure he was ready. He nodded, his expression serious. "I don't know how long this will last," Zia said, her voice low. "We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere they can't track us." Daniel glanced around, his eyes narrowing as he searched for a place to hide. "There's an old warehouse up ahead. It's out of the way and should provide some cover." Zia didn't hesitate. She trusted his judgment and followed him as they made their way toward the warehouse. The city was alive with the hum of technology, the streets lit up with neon lights and the buzz of hovercrafts overhead. But there was no time to appreciate the beauty of the metropolis. Their lives depended on staying one step ahead of the mercenaries, and Zia knew they couldn't afford any distractions. As they neared the warehouse, Zia's senses flared. The mercenaries were getting closer, their presence unmistakable. She could hear their voices, low and threatening, as they scoured the streets in search of them. But the warehouse was only a few steps away now, and she pushed herself harder, willing her legs to move faster. They reached the entrance, and Daniel quickly pushed the door open. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of distant streetlights that filtered through cracks in the walls. It was a perfect hiding spot, at least for now. They slipped inside, and Daniel secured the door behind them. Zia leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. She could still hear the mercenaries outside, their voices growing fainter as they moved past the warehouse. She knew it wouldn't be long before they realized they had been tricked. But for now, they were safe. Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Zia nodded, though her mind was still racing. "I'm fine. We need to plan our next move." Daniel gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We'll figure it out. But we need to talk first." Zia looked at him, confused. "Talk? About what?" He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "About you. About why they're after you." Zia stiffened. She had been dreading this moment. She had tried to keep her past hidden, to keep her true identity a secret. But now, standing here in the dark, with the weight of the situation pressing down on her, she couldn't avoid it any longer. Daniel was right, they needed to talk. "They're not just after me because I'm an alien," Zia began, her voice low. "I'm a fugitive. A traitor." Daniel's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Zia closed her eyes, gathering her thoughts. She hadn't spoken about her past in years, and the words felt foreign on her tongue. But there was no turning back now. She took a deep breath and continued. "I was once part of a powerful alien faction. A group that ruled over many worlds, including Earth. But she paused, her throat tightening. "I couldn't stand what they were doing. The oppression, the destruction. It was too much. So, I left. I betrayed them. I ran. Daniel's eyes softened with understanding, and he took a step closer to her. You're not a traitor, Zia. You're just trying to survive. Zia shook her head. It's not that simple. They want me back. They'll do anything to capture me, to make me pay for what I did. Then we won't let them, Daniel said firmly. You don't have to face this alone. I'll help you. For the first time since she had met Daniel, Zia felt something stir inside her. Hope. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. She had spent so long running, hiding, and fighting. But now, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. She looked at Daniel, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. We'll figure this out. Together. The calm of the warehouse didn't last long. Zia could feel it in the air, something wasn't right. The stillness, once a comfort, now felt heavy, suffocating. She stood near the back corner, scanning the shadows, trying to keep her mind sharp. Daniel was beside her, his gaze flicking between the door and the small windows above them. But there was something else there, a shift in the way he looked at her. It was subtle, but Zia felt it. A lingering tension, a momentary hesitation. She couldn't place it, but it made her uneasy. We can't stay here for long, Daniel said, his voice tense. They're looking for us, and they won't stop until they find us. Zia nodded. She had been expecting this. They could only hide for so long before the mercenaries caught up with them. But there was no clear plan, no backup. It was just the two of them, against the entire might of a ruthless alien faction. The thought weighed on her, but she knew she had to keep moving, keep fighting. We'll need a way out, Zia said, her eyes narrowing. We need to find a ship, something that can take us off planet. Daniel didn't respond immediately, but Zia caught the hesitation again in his eyes. She studied him closely, the unease growing in her gut. You okay? She asked, her voice soft but firm. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Zia thought he was going to say something, but then he just nodded. I'm fine. We'll get out of here. We have to. Zia could tell he was lying. His face was too tight, his shoulders too stiff. Something was off. But before she could press him further, the sound of footsteps reached her ears, slow, deliberate, echoing through the stillness of the warehouse. Zia stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon at her side. Daniel turned toward the entrance, his body tense. Get ready, he whispered. They're here. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Zia's heart raced. She could feel the pressure building, the fear threatening to rise. But she couldn't let it show. Not now. She was a warrior, and warriors didn't show fear. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and a single figure stepped inside. At first, Zia thought it was one of the mercenaries, but then her eyes locked on the figure's face, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, dressed in the same dark uniform as the mercenaries. But there was something different about her. She was familiar. Too familiar. Zia, the woman said, her voice cold but laced with something else, something personal. I knew you'd be here. Zia's stomach dropped. She recognized the voice immediately. It was Ava, her old ally, her former friend. But how? Ava had disappeared years ago, presumed dead after a brutal attack on their squad. Zia had mourned her, thought she had lost her forever. But now, here she was, standing in front of her, like a ghost from the past. Ava? Zia whispered, barely able to believe her eyes. Ava's lips twisted into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm surprised you remember me. I thought you'd have forgotten by now. Zia's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Ava had been part of the same faction, but they had fought side by side. Zia had trusted her with her life. But now, seeing her standing here, everything felt wrong. She felt betrayed, like everything she had known was a lie. "What are you doing here?" Zia demanded, her voice rising. "You were dead. You disappeared." Ava's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Zia thought she saw a flash of regret in them. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "I wasn't dead, Zia. I was just reborn. After the attack, I was found by them. They fixed me. They made me stronger. And now, I'm their weapon." Zia's heart sank. She knew exactly who Ava was talking about, the same faction she had betrayed. They had always been ruthless, using people as tools, discarding them when they were no longer useful. But this was different. Ava wasn't just an ally anymore. She was their enemy. "You're working for them?" Zia's voice trembled, a mix of anger and disbelief. "After everything we went through together? You betrayed me." Ava's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. "You betrayed me first, Zia. You left us. You abandoned everything we had fought for. You betrayed the cause." Zia took a step back, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected Ava to be on the other side, fighting for the very faction she had run from. Her heart ached with the weight of the betrayal. But there was no time to dwell on it. The mercenaries were still out there, and Ava wasn't the only threat. "I'm not your enemy, Ava," Zia said, her voice steady. "I'm not the same person I was before. I'm fighting for something better now. I'm fighting for humanity." Ava's face twisted in disgust. "You've changed, Zia. But that doesn't matter. I'm here to bring you back. Alive. And if I have to, I'll kill him." She glanced at Daniel, who was standing quietly by Zia's side. Zia's blood ran cold. She could see it in Ava's eyes, there was no doubt she would carry out her threat. The past few days had been filled with danger, but nothing compared to the situation they were in now. Ava had the power to end everything in an instant. "I won't let you hurt him," Zia growled, her body tense, ready to spring into action. Ava took a step closer, her hand resting on the weapon at her side. "You don't have a choice, Zia. You're either with us, or you're against us." The tension in the room was unbearable. Zia felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She had trusted Ava once, but now, Ava was just another enemy. A friend turned foe. The pain of that betrayal hit harder than anything she had ever felt. But there was no turning back now. Zia couldn't afford to lose any more. "I won't join you," Zia said, her voice firm. "I will fight for the people who need me. And I will protect him. No matter what." Ava's eyes flashed with fury, and in an instant, the air around them crackled with the energy of a weapon charging. Zia braced herself, knowing what was coming. This would be their final stand. The tension in the warehouse was unbearable. Zia's heart raced as Ava's weapon crackled with energy, the ominous hum filling the air. Her eyes never left Ava, but her mind was racing, calculating, thinking of a way out. She couldn't lose here, not after everything they'd been through. Daniel stood behind her, silent but ready, the weight of the situation settling in his stance. He was bracing for what was coming, but Zia could feel his fear. It wasn't just for his own life. It was for her. Ava's hand tightened on the weapon, her eyes locked onto Zia with cold intensity. "You always were too idealistic, Zia. But now you've made your choice. It's too late to turn back." Zia shook her head. "I'm not the same person I was before. I'm fighting for something better. Something worth saving." Ava didn't respond, only tightened her grip on the weapon. The light from the weapon's energy beam flickered dangerously. Zia's breath came faster as she made a decision. She couldn't let Ava win, not like this. I won't let you destroy everything, Zia said, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm and resolute. She glanced at Daniel, who was already moving toward the exit in the shadows. He knew what was coming. Without warning, Ava raised her weapon, and the first shot rang out, cutting through the air like a bullet. Zia dove to the side just in time, feeling the heat of the energy blast on her skin. She barely rolled out of the way, but the blast made a loud, sizzling sound as it collided with the warehouse wall, leaving a black scorch mark where it hit. Zia's pulse thundered in her ears. She was already on her feet, moving toward the far corner, using the shadows to stay out of sight. She had to think fast. Ava wouldn't stop. Not until Zia was dead, and neither would the mercenaries that were still out there. Zia's mind raced. Her thoughts turned to the tools she had with her, the tech she'd scavenged along the way, the skills she'd learned. She wasn't the same person anymore. She had trained herself, learned how to fight with everything she had. But the stakes were higher now. It wasn't just her life on the line. It was Daniel's, and the entire future of humanity. Ava's eyes gleamed as she moved toward Zia, her steps deliberate, calculated. You're just delaying the inevitable, Zia. You know I'll win. I'll never give up, Zia replied, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Suddenly, there was a sharp, metallic clang from above. Zia's eyes snapped up to see a small drone hovering in the doorway, its red eyes flashing as it scanned the room. Ava's mercenaries were outside, preparing to strike, but Zia wasn't about to let them get the upper hand. She quickly grabbed a small device from her belt and threw it toward the drone. It exploded in a burst of light and sound, short-circuiting it before it could alert the others. Ava's eyes narrowed, her hand still clenched around the weapon. Clever. But it won't save you. The moment Zia had been waiting for came. She rushed forward, using her momentum to close the gap between them. Ava fired again, but Zia ducked, rolling to the side and using the environment around her to stay hidden. Every move had to be precise. One wrong step, and she could be dead. The warehouse was now a battlefield, every inch of the room filled with tension and the hum of weapons charging. Zia could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her. It wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to herself, to everyone, that humanity could stand up to the odds. That they weren't just a bunch of helpless, insignificant beings. They were strong, capable, and they could fight back. With a burst of energy, Zia darted out from behind the cover, aiming for Ava. In that split second, she managed to disarm her, knocking the weapon out of her hands and sending it clattering to the ground. But Ava wasn't finished. With a snarl, she lunged at Zia, using her strength to push her to the ground. The two women grappled, their bodies entwined in a fight for survival. Zia struggled against Ava's grip, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she fought to get free. Every punch, every move was a desperate attempt to break free from the hold that Ava had on her. But Ava was stronger, faster, and more ruthless. You don't have to do this, Ava. Zia gasped, trying to push her off. You can still come back. You don't have to be their weapon. But Ava's expression twisted with fury. I'm past saving, Zia. I made my choice. You made yours. Just as Ava was about to land another blow, Zia spotted Daniel. He had reappeared, sneaking up behind Ava with a small weapon of his own. He knew how to stay out of sight, how to use the environment to his advantage. In that moment, Zia's heart raced. Daniel was her ally, her protector, and he had never backed down from a fight. Without hesitation, Daniel jumped at Ava, tackling her to the ground. The two struggled, rolling across the floor as Zia watched in shock. She couldn't help but feel the relief flood through her when Daniel finally managed to pin Ava down, his strong hands keeping her from getting up. Go! Daniel shouted to Zia, his face a mix of exhaustion and determination. Get the device. We can end this now. Zia didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. She moved quickly, her eyes darting around the warehouse for the device that would give them a chance to destroy the mercenaries' communication systems. With every step, she could feel the weight of the battle pressing on her. This wasn't just a fight for her life. It was a fight for everything they had fought for. Finally, Zia reached the device, and in a blur of motion, she activated it. The blast that followed lit up the warehouse, sending a wave of energy through the building. Ava's eyes widened in shock as she realized what was happening. "You lost," Zia whispered, her voice a quiet triumph. The mercenaries' signals were blocked, and their forces scattered. Zia and Daniel had won. But as she looked down at Ava, who was still glaring up at her with hatred, Zia knew the battle was far from over. This was just the beginning. The first light of dawn filtered through the cracked windows of the old building. The battle had been fought, the victory secured, but the weight of it all still lingered in the air. Zia stood silently, her hand resting on the edge of the shattered wall, looking out at the horizon. The sky was a deep purple, streaked with the warm colors of the new day, but for Zia, it felt like the calm before a new storm. Daniel was by her side, his face tired, his eyes distant, but there was a sense of relief in his posture. They had won. The mercenaries were scattered, and Ava had been captured. But even with the victory, Zia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. "Do you think this is really over?" Zia asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she turned to Daniel. He glanced at her, his gaze softening. "No. But it's a start. We've taken the first step." He paused, looking out at the horizon as well. "We've shown the galaxy that humanity isn't to be underestimated. That's something." Zia nodded, but there was still a sense of unease in her chest. They had fought against forces far more powerful than themselves. The Galactic Council, Ava's betrayal, and the mercenaries, they had all been part of a larger scheme to suppress humanity. But the people of Earth had fought back, and for the first time in a long while, Zia felt a flicker of hope. The fight had been brutal. She had lost friends along the way, people who had believed in the cause, who had given everything to this fight. Their sacrifices weighed heavily on her heart. She could still hear the echo of Bonner's last words, the pain in his eyes as he lay dying in her arms. His death had been a turning point. It had hardened her resolve, but it also reminded her of how much they had all lost. "We've come so far," Zia murmured, "but at what cost?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He knew exactly what she meant. They had lost too many, and the war wasn't over. They had fought for their survival, for their future, but the galaxy was still full of dangers, full of enemies who would stop at nothing to keep humanity from rising. It wasn't just Ava and the mercenaries they had to worry about. There were larger forces at play. But Zia wasn't afraid anymore. "We keep moving forward," Daniel said finally, his voice steady. "We don't let their sacrifices be in vain. We rebuild. We fight for a future where we don't have to look over our shoulders anymore." Zia looked at him, her expression softening. "And we'll protect the ones we love," she added quietly. Together, they turned away from the window, leaving the remains of the warehouse behind them. The streets outside were quiet now, the chaos of the past few hours beginning to fade. The fighting was over, for now. But Zia knew that peace was fleeting. There was still work to be done. They had to rebuild, to re-establish contact with the rest of humanity, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. As they walked through the quiet streets, they passed other survivors, people who had fought in the battle, people who had lost everything. Some were walking with their heads held high, others were still in shock. Zia could see the exhaustion on their faces, but there was also something else. There was a spark in their eyes, something they hadn't had before. They had seen what humanity was capable of. They had seen their strength. But it wasn't just the humans who had changed. Zia had changed too. The journey she had gone on, from the young, idealistic fighter to someone who had faced death and betrayal and come out stronger on the other side, it had shaped her. She wasn't the same person she had been when this all started, and she knew she'd never be that person again. She glanced at Daniel. His face was still serious, but she could see the pride in his eyes. They had made it through the storm together. And now, they had a new purpose, to ensure that humanity would rise from the ashes and take its place among the stars. They reached a small clearing, a place where the survivors had gathered. Some were tending to the wounded, while others were preparing for what came next. Zia's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness. The people she had fought beside were now her family. Their journey together had forged an unbreakable bond, and she knew that they would continue to fight, to rebuild, and to survive. "This is only the beginning," Zia said, her voice steady with determination. "We've won this battle, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next. Humanity has to stand united. We need to keep pushing forward, for ourselves, for the future." Daniel nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. "And we will. Together." As the sun began to rise higher, casting its golden light across the battlefield, Zia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she believed in the future. Humanity had faced impossible odds and had emerged victorious. They had shown the galaxy that they were more than just a species to be ignored, more than just a planet to be conquered. They were strong, resilient, and capable of rising above anything that tried to tear them down. Zia looked at the horizon once more, her heart filled with hope for the future. The fight wasn't over, but she knew they had already won something far greater than a battle. They had won the chance to build something new. A future where they could finally be free. And with that, Zia knew that the new dawn had truly begun.